if someone had told me how difficult it would be to raise money, or what we now know at the time, the stats around women and women of color raising money weren't really well understood. So I was having this experience that was later validated with numbers. It's really, really hard, and everyone can look at the stats. They're pretty grim. But I didn't have that perspective, and so you kind of get up every day and you keep trying. I did have the benefit of some great mentors, and also just this tenacity and I'm just one of those people that will never give up, kind of to a fault.
Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? The answer is Deals. This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On the show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions to smaller deals that you can do even without significant capital. My name is Corey Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the DealQuest podcast. Let's get started. Sherisse Hawkins, CEO, founder of Pagedip, builder, learner, risk taker, motivator, rainmaker, speaker, corporate escapee, creative-minded CEO with a strong engineering background, proven record in meeting impossible deadlines, delighting customers, and reimagining how things can be done. Believes anything is possible in the digital world. Sherisse is an engineer and technologist and has a passion for driving the evolution of digital narrative content and believes that she has the best job ever as founder and CEO of Pagedip. As an award-winning business owner and accomplished international speaker, Sherisse loves helping others on their life's journey. She appeared in Vanity Fair and on Shark Tank, ABC's Shark Tank. Sherisse's background includes working as a Walt Disney Imagineer, building theme parks around the globe, as well as joining Time Warner Cable, where she served as a vice president of software development and holds 2 degrees in engineering. I can't even tell you how excited I am to have Sherisse on the DealQuest podcast. Welcome, Sherisse.
Thank you, Corey. It's nice to be here.
So, folks, Sherisse and I have really just started to get to know each other, but it's like totally connected on our prep calls, and it's just you're in for a real treat. So, Sherisse, before we start talking about deals and what you're doing now, and all the great experiences you've had, I want to take you back to when you were growing up as a little girl, 8, 10, 12 years old. What did you want to be? Because my guess is, being an entrepreneur and raising capital like you did and being in the digital space might not have been it, but tell me if I'm wrong.
You're correct. That was not in my brain at the time. Like a lot of little girls in my era, I wanted to be a ballerina. And so I took dance classes. I still enjoy dancing. I still take dance classes, including aerial dance. But I think the sphere and the draw of technology just wasn't part of the ecosystem. I grew up in the Midwest. People acknowledged that I was smart and I liked learning, but the idea of technology and the idea of science just weren't part of the kind of educational systems or the kind of even programming that my daughter, who also became an engineer, by the way, grew up with. So it wasn't until I got into high school that I realized the potential of those kind of careers. But my mom tells this funny story about there was this one particular Barbie kitchen that was it was called a carousel kitchen, and it did all these little things or would move and spin, and it broke, and I took it apart and I put it back together and I made sure that it worked. And she claims that was her first inkling that I was going to be an engineer because I took apart this Barbie toy when I was really small.
You and my brother would get along great because my brother, I never had that skill. My brother would be like 8 years old and and I'm going back. He's younger than me, but he's still in his 50s. And he would take apart like a transistor radio, right? That was broken, and put it back together, or like all these other things, and it would work. And sometimes he wouldn't even know all the pieces back in it, but it would work. And I never understood how he could do that. I just don't have that skill.
Yeah, it's so satisfying though, and I tell people that engineering is one of the best jobs in the world because there is a sense of immediate gratification when the code runs or when the project works. It's just exhilarating to have that happen.
Love it. All right, and one more question going back. What was your first deal of any type whether it was when you were a kid or older or whatever, like anything that happens to come to mind.
My first deal. That's a tough question. I don't think about the world of deals or even think about the term until I became an entrepreneur. But I do think in corporate, understanding how decisions are made and how big deals are made within our organization was really eye-opening for me. As a technologist, I thought, well, you have a bake-off and you look at what criteria needs to be met in order to make the right decision, and that's the product you go with, or that's the service that you go with. And I learned, as we all do, that there are a lot more factors how you make a decision of which way you're going to go than just what technology is the best. There's a lot of other concerns that are not just technical, not just by the book.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear how that sort of learning, played into how things, evolved for you. So let's start talking about that. I mean, your bio says you're a corporate escapee. You've obviously made that jump some time back from the corporate world. From great corporate experiences to being, an entrepreneur and raising capital and having all these great experiences. Talk to me a little bit about how'd you make that jump and. Not only the circumstances, but also, there's a mindset shift, right? Not everybody is cut out for that. Yeah. Talk to me about some of your experience around that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think there's a lot of factors, including where you go mentally to make a decision to take an entrepreneurial journey. And I worked in some very, very large organizations, from Walt Disney Imagineers to large media companies like Time Warner Cable before they were purchased by Charter. So I didn't have that experience of working in any small companies before I started my own. And like a lot of women that I've learned now, I decided to start this journey later in life. So I had a daughter who was in high school, and I told my husband, I'm not going to. There's certain things that I won't put in jeopardy as I start this journey. And one of them is our daughter is 529. So I decided that making sure that she could go to college was a really important milestone for us to be able to take this risk. And I knew it was a very big risk. But there's also risk in not following your dreams and staying in a situation that was very safe, was very rewarding, but a little bit too safe, if you know what I mean. So that thrill of going to work every day, we produce some fantastic products and they've gone out to millions of people around the world. And I realized that I like starting things. I like the challenge of, will it work right? And having to strive and struggle to make sure that things get to where you need them to be. And when they get to close to steady state, that's not my favorite part of the project. And I've been at my last job for almost 10 years through many different roles, different projects. But it just felt like it was time. It was time to go. Much to my husband's dismay. He's like, you have this great title, you have a corner office, you have a bonus structure. But there's something in your heart, there's something that draws you, out into this entrepreneurial journey. One person said, it's when you can't ignore that voice anymore, when you can't say no anymore, that it's time to go. And I definitely got to that point. And I recognized that the way we communicate, how we communicate, the tools that we had at our disposal with digital, tools and technology, there's a lot more potential for how we could do better. And I wanted to lead the way in that.
I love it. And listeners, I'm a little bit laughing, although I don't know how old Sherisse is. She would have made it sound like she did this at like 60, later in life, which is definitely not the case. I can tell you that much, even though it's funny. I think there's this myth around entrepreneurship because of, you hear about these, 17 and 22-year-olds and whatever that, and if you look at the statistics, it's actually statistically, there are, many, many people who start, companies in their 40s, 50s and 60s, actually, it's a myth that it's, only the 22-year-olds that are starting companies. So I think, that later in life comment, it depends on who you compare it to, right?
Well, I did start in my 40s and I remember that my mom said, what are you doing? And I started the company. I also started doing something called aerial dance, when you climb fabric to the top of a high ceiling and then unfurl in these really cool, beautiful ways. And she said, you're too old for this. And I looked at her and I'm like, what does that mean? Like, that just doesn't work for me. If I'm interested in it, and I'm going to go for it. And so we laugh about that because I might be the oldest person to have started doing that activity as well. But seriously, I did learn, as you said, that there are kind of like two phases of life that people tend to start organizations. When they're really young, they don't have a lot of responsibilities. And then when they've got a little bit more, like I said, the 529 was in the bank, they feel like they won't provide any additional hardship for their children, for example. And that was really important to me.
Right. And it's time to really pursue the dream, right? And
Right.
do it the way you want to do it. So give us a couple of, just a couple of minutes on what you're actually doing now and what, living that dream. And then we'll move into talking about some of the deals you've done. But, tell us what the company does and who you help and all that kind of great stuff.
Absolutely. So the easiest way to describe Pagedip is I really think of it's what Microsoft Word would have developed if they had created a word processor in the time of the internet. So we look at how people communicate, how we read information, often on mobile devices or different size screens. And we created an editor that allows you to marry in what we refer to as core content with all other sorts of media elements. And so by bringing this narrative flow concept to the power of how we can add additional information right into the middle of what you're trying to share, this experience of being able to stay on one page, delve deeper into all sorts of adjacent material, make sure that material is up to date, make sure that it's measurable, give people analytics around what the experience is like, and have it be in a secure wrapper, is mind-blowing for the organizations that we support. So it's typically enterprise companies, and the content that they produce using Pagedip, we call them Pagedips, are these interactive, measurable, engaging, secure documents. And we've done everything from leadership educational materials to post-op care for a children's hospital, where the actual nurses were in the editors creating these great experiences and delighting the parents of children who need to understand how to take care of their loved ones. So imagine a document that has all the beauty of being able to read and skim with all of the media elements that you could imagine to really understand the core content. It's quite amazing.
Love it. So folks, and we'll obviously, Sherisse will give her contact information later. It'll be in the show notes, so you can go, check out all the great work that they're doing. So when you started Pagedip, did you anticipate from day one that you'd be raising capital? Did that come later? Did you raise capital from day one or later? Tell us the journey around capital raising, decision making, and planning.
Sure. I put a little bit of my own money in to start the company. And then interestingly, I found it difficult to find a co-founder to work with. I had an idea of what I wanted to do. I have a lot of experience in communication and entertainment. So I felt like I was really well suited to tackle this new era of how we communicate. But people who were kind of my peers in that, kind of early 40s world didn't want to take the risk. And so I ended up meeting a co-founder, the person that became the co-founder, who was a new graduate from CU. I met through a mutual friend. And we went off, having only met each other 3 times beforehand, to Australia to a startup accelerator. And it was there that the idea really was able to incubate further. We got a lot of great mentorship and really starting to understand what raising capital can do to kickstart an organization. Now I understand that there's really great pros and cons to bootstrapping versus bringing in outside capital. But I do think that going through the accelerator program, we realized that raising capital made the most sense for a number of different reasons.
Was this a technical co-founder that you brought in? Was that
Yes?
Okay, which is what I sort of assumed, but I just wanted to be clear. And then, how did you come to find out about this accelerator in Australia?
There is a wonderful woman by the name of Jan Matthews, who is a Kauffman Fellow, and her expertise is around helping organizations grow. I had met her briefly in Boulder and saw her speak in Boulder before it was the announcement of her going off to do this accelerator as part of the Global Accelerator Network. And we sort of exchanged information. And I heard by starting to follow, her path that they were accepting companies from around the globe. At first, I thought that was going to just be in Australia. So Alex and I applied for the program with very, very little thoughts that we might get in. And much to our surprise, found out that we were accepted into this accelerator, which was based the first class that they'd had. And we had, I think it was something like 3 weeks to get there. So going from Boulder, Colorado to Australia with 3 weeks notice, what do you do with the dog in the house? So it was a really great start to jumping into the entrepreneurial journey, frankly. And it also was a great way to understand how to work together with a co-founder. I highly recommend being able to go with your team to an environment where you're really having to figure it out in real time every day. I think it set the stage for how the company grew later. And you asked about the first deal. So through demo days, we did a pitch. We had a number of investors interested in our idea, which has, of course, pivoted since then. Sure. That's what all startups do. But that was the beginning of our fundraising journey.
Love it. So talk about some of the lessons on the fundraising journey. I mean, you mentioned the fact that after the fact, you sort of got a bigger appreciation for the distinction between raising capital versus bootstrapping and things like that. And, it was sort of like like any founder who's never raised money before, you learn as the journey goes, yes. And you make decisions with the information you have. So, tell us about that fundraising journey and the lessons you learned from it, good and bad.
I laugh because there's a number of things about this path that I think if someone really had sketched it out for me, I wonder if I would have taken the leap. When right. It's kind of nice to not know what you don't know in the beginning, because then you have the energy and the enthusiasm to go through. If someone had told me how difficult it would be to raise money, or what we now know at the time, the stats around women and women of color raising money weren't really well understood. So I was having this experience that was later validated with numbers. It's really, really hard, and everyone can look at the stats; they're pretty grim. But I didn't have that perspective, and so you kind of get up every day and you keep trying. I did have the benefit of some great mentors, and also just this tenacity, and I'm just one of those people that will never give up, kind of to a fault. But raising money did take quite a while. We've had 2 rounds of seed investment. And I guess the 3 things I would tell people who maybe haven't raised before is it takes longer than you think. And certainly if you're female or a person of color, it is a full-time job. And so there's this tension between needing and wanting to run the business and move the product forward, and the reality of how all-consuming the fundraising effort is. And I think everyone thinks, that won't be like that for me. I'll be able to do both. And the reality is that it's a full-time job. And the last piece is really being able to, I had some interesting experiences. I had some people say, this idea is too big. Why do you think you can pull that off? And I've had people say, you're not thinking big enough. Why can't this be a multi-billion-dollar company? And so there's a lot of internal dynamics, and there's a lot of kind of mindful or thoughts that go in your mind that are interesting along the journey that I didn't expect.
Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can invite you to a new way to determine your deal readiness. I created a fast and easy assessment that will determine exactly how deal ready you are. Once you complete the assessment, I use your responses to identify the obstacles that are holding you back from being a deal-driven growth genius. It's as easy as heading to CoreyKupfer.com/assessment. That's CoreyKupfer.com/assessment, and filling out a few multiple choice questions. I'll be checking in after the episode to see what your results are. Now back to the show. Yeah, so let's explore that a little bit. I mean, the more common one of those two that entrepreneurs who are raising money of all backgrounds often hear is, I don't think the idea is big enough, right? I mean, the whole concept of especially venture money is that, they want to pour gas on on something that's really going to then accelerate, and they're going to make, many multiples, not just 2-3 times, right? They're looking for that unicorn. Interviewed Nick Adams, who's a VC with founder of Differential Ventures, whose episode will air probably maybe a month before yours, who talked about the fact that, velocity, is important. They have a fund, they have capital they're deploying, they have investors, all that kind of stuff. So that's a common one. But the conversation on the flip side about, that it's too big, I'm wondering what are the dynamics, if you're willing to talk about them, because I have some assumptions on what might have played into that, at least part of that, because that's something I think that you'll hear less commonly from VCs, or at least most founders will. So any thoughts?
Yes. I've really reflected on this, and this will probably get a little deep, but as a woman and as a person of color, everything that you experience, there is another filter that you have of would someone have said that to me if I didn't look the way I do, and you'll never know, because we don't live in that world where you get to do things over and come in with a different. You
don't have the alternative universe where you can
where I could dress differently or look differently, but I do think that just based on my corporate experience, that we still have some stereotypes and some assumptions of what technologists look like.
Mm.
And so one of the things I interpreted was, this is a really big undertaking. I really think this is the new way that we are going to communicate, and that we are at an inflection point where we're changing the way people will experience content forevermore. That's a really big, bold statement. And, in a 5-minute pitch, do you have time to explain what your technical prowess is and your background and how you deployed products to 13 million subscribers? Do you have an opportunity to talk about, building theme parks from the ground up and literally being a part of the teams that do that? No. And so you have to somehow convey that confidence and that expertise. Sometimes that's a lot of nonverbal pieces. And so I learned from that experience to find ways to bring that background more to the forefront, and maybe even taking a little bit longer than others may need to or want to talk about those accomplishments, and to really own the fact that I am a technologist and I am a visionary. What are some things in my past that prove that point? Because we still have, even though my daughter's an engineer, as I mentioned before, we still have a lot of preconceived notions about what intelligence, what passion, what entrepreneurs really look like. It's exciting to be able to break those molds.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the conversation of implicit bias, which is inherent in a lot of what you talked about in general, if anybody, has really done any study on it, is there. I mean, whether it's the studies on resumes that have the same exact resume with different names, one that
Yes.
sounds white and one that sounds black, or the studies or the actual experience they did when they started with orchestras and doing blind blind rehearsals, and the shift that happened in gender certainly was huge, and in background, in race and ethnicity, in terms of the makeup of the people who got accepted. So that's there, and then on top of this, you have the engineer part, which is like, I think there's another layer of assumption, built-in implicit assumption beyond the general, just any entrepreneur trying to raise money. So I think you had a double whammy there.
But what's also funny is, engineers I'm data driven. When I ask a question, I'll tend to answer it more literally or with more facts. But that's not to say that you can't have a vision or reach for the stars. Or I think engineering is one of the most creative roles or creative jobs on the planet. And I absolutely love it. But sometimes that interest in and guidance by data can be a little bit in contrast with the view of, you might ignore the facts and shoot for the stars. I think that they can actually coexist, and you can be more effective by having both parts of your brain working on the problem. Even the engineering, the attitude around wanting to do your research and providing, very diligent answers can sometimes be perceived as a little bit of a wet blanket on a really, really big idea. So I've learned to tone that down a little bit, I think.
So I want to take us even a cut deeper, and I feel like because of our off-air conversations where you and I have, I think, connected on and are aligned on so many levels, I hope I have permission to do this, which is, we've taken it a cut deeper just in terms of some of the other factors that may have been at play externally in terms of you as a woman of color, and an engineer presenting. What about the internal journey around that, right? In terms of whether it was you growing up and, what you thought was possible, and the journey of, how do you get to the point where, because I'm sure there must have been a journey where you not only can say, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, but I'm somebody who's going to raise capital, and in face of all of these obstacles, I'm not going to quit and I'm going to make it happen. Like, there's got to be an internal journey that went along with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, first of all, I mentioned before, I'm tenacious to a fault. And one of the things that I've really grappled with is, when and if do you say that this is enough and you can't get there from here? I haven't found that place yet, but there's definitely there have been low points. There have been challenges. There's been self-doubt. And I strongly believe that if you can see it, you can be it. And there's not a lot of, I had the opportunity to be in the magazine Vanity Fair a couple of years ago, where they brought 26 women of color who'd raised over $1 million. And the point of that was not that it's not possible, but look, like, we could all fit in a really small room. Like, there just weren't a lot. And I only knew about one of them before I went to that photo shoot. And so there's a little bit of a challenge of, is this possible? When you're the first, or when you're one of the first, it's a little lonely, and there can be a lot of doubt of whether this is really possible. And so you grapple with that, and then you have to figure out how to look it in the eye, and then also continue to move forward and take those small wins and look at how far you've come each and every day. But I would be remiss to not say that it does play in your mind. There's a little part of your brain that's always processing, is this possible in our society, in our ecosystem right now? And how can I make it more possible? Because the numbers aren't great, and there's not a lot of Time magazine covers of people that look like me who have created billion-dollar companies. And so it is a challenge. It is a little bit of the dark side of what you have to face.
Yeah, and it's interesting for me because I always look at the layers because, first of all, the number of businesses owned by anybody, including white men, right, who raise capital is a tiny percentage. The number of those businesses that have $1 million in revenue above is in single digits, right? So like just starting, like just that journey for anybody is, an interesting journey. And I know folks of all backgrounds who suffer from, we all have some level of imposter syndrome, and like, am I really good enough to do this? And then when you layer on everything else, and I think it's why representation is so important. And I think those of us who listen, I'm a white man, right? It's been a journey for me over time to understand, because of course my default is seeing me represented on as CEOs, as entrepreneurs, heads of companies, on television,
that's played on TV. That's you, right?
As every president of the United States up until Barack Obama. It's like it's the default way of being, and I think those of us who are in the majorities, so to speak, in terms of various backgrounds and identities, it's much harder to understand what the lack of that kind of representation, the impact has. And the only thing I can extrapolate from is sort of being a low middle class kid growing up in Brooklyn, where we always had food on the table, but, we didn't have, it was paycheck to paycheck kind of thing. And, even that, when I first stepped into the big legal world dealing with super successful people and companies, when I was in my 20s, was intimidating, and I was sort of like, am I supposed to be here kind of thing? Like, I don't, this is not my world, right? And that was, just from sort of, economic differences. And then when you add, but yet I had the advantage of being a male and being white. So, I think I don't know, just representation is just so important.
And I think we tend to, we buy from people that we know, we help people that we know. Our circles, how do you make sure that your circles intersect? There's a friend of mine who's a CEO, and he said, yeah, if I run out of money, I can just call, he has a couple people in his network that are really, really high net worth.
Yeah.
And he just in passing, and I thought, wow, what's it like to be in an environment where you have a couple of people in your really close network that have really, really high net worth? It is one of those moments. I hadn't thought about it before, but that's not my reality at all. So there's just subtle things that come to light. On the other hand, I think that part of success and part of, like you said, that internal journey is you have to pull from your own stores of self-worth and empowerment and creativity and curiosity. And my take is, okay, maybe this isn't the easiest path, but what are some creative ways for me to figure out how to continue to make this journey worthwhile, and how to give more how to give more to our customers than they expect. And at the end of the day, I think that's what proves that businesses do succeed with some of those very simple, the attitude that comes with, let me be of service and let me make sure that we're doing the best thing that we can.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, the minute you take money, right? you're in a very different position as an entrepreneur. There are, one of the reasons we become entrepreneurs is that we have a vision and we want to be our own bosses and make our own decisions. And I'm not saying the first round of capital, depending upon how your deal is structured, et cetera, you still, have a decent level of control, but it is different. The minute you have a responsibility to an investor, they may have certain legal rights, or input. Certainly over time, as you raise capital, that may increase. But even just the concept of having other people's money, even if they don't have any kind of legal control, I think shifts things. So I'd love to hear your perspective, on that. And there's good and bad. Sometimes there's challenges, but there's also obviously opportunities out of that. What's been your experience?
It's been great to have, first of all, people believe in our vision and see the potential for how this type of content can change, can really have a positive effect on businesses and society at large. And one of the things I think is interesting is some of the, we've had investors, kind of with all different sizes, and some of the investors who have put in, smaller amounts of money have been those that have been the most challenging to deal with, and others, there's always it's like a bell curve. There's always a few that really have your back, that really want to open those doors, that are really, kind of keeping the product and the success top of mind. And then there's also a collection of more passive investors. Without that entire spectrum, our cap table would not be, we would have raised the amount that we did. So there's an additional level of responsibility, but there's an additional level of capacity for influence, for advice, for really helping guide the journey of the product. So one person talked about mentor madness. You kind of learn who really is aligned with the vision of the product, and we've gotten very, very close to those investors, and several of them have come into the second round. So overall, I would say a very positive experience, but I didn't realize that. There's kind of like the passive investors, there's the strategic investors, and then there's also maybe people that I want to be an angel investor. That's one of my personal goals. But just because you've put some money in does not mean that you can make all the decisions. And I think it's important to have set that expectation, to have people understand at the end of the day, the company has to make some decisions to make the product and the customers happy. So I didn't expect, like I said, one of the more junior investors to be the most challenging investor.
And it's I'm sort of giggling because it seems like, that is not only just your experience. It's
Am I not alone?
The smallest clients are the ones that give you the most headache.
Yes.
The smallest investors are the ones that give you the most headache.
Yes.
It's funny how that happens. And listen, and the cons. I love the fact that and I have this conversation with people all the time. The concept of strategic investors, and and you hear that. Especially people raising their first, in their first company, may think I just need the money, right? Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. I remember, when I interviewed way back, probably over a year ago, when Niles Heron was on the show, and he talked about how if all you need is money, you will find the money. And I know, and by the way, he acknowledged he's not sure of color as well. He acknowledged the difficulties as well, whatever. But he talked about how companies think that they just need money, but really, and one of the things that he's focused on helping companies with now is really, hey, well, maybe your great product isn't quite as good as you think it is. Like you think, or maybe your marketing really does need to step up, and so. I think some initial founders, at least, I think people who've been in the game a little bit really understand it, may undervalue the strategic benefit of the right investors as opposed to just getting a check.
Yes, I totally agree. One of my friends, and a serial entrepreneur, successful entrepreneur in the med space, who lives in the UK, said, all money is green, and it's been the same way, but who's behind that, and how the strategic element is something that you really have to pause and consider. And it's one of the reasons, frankly, that I was really interested about being on this show is we are actively interested in more strategics. And again, given the background and my past, that has not been an area that I could easily tap into, but it's one that I'm keenly aware of now and very curious about and striving to learn more about and invite those kind of conversations into our existing product and ecosystem.
Love it. Love it. All right. So let's talk a little bit about, let's shift gears because I want to hear, you were on Shark Tank. Obviously, there are a number of limitations that, people, things they can talk about, not talk about legally when they're on Shark Tank. We've had some other, Precious Williams was on the show and she had a Shark Tank experience that she shared. And it's interesting. I mentioned, Nick Adams' interview, which comes out about a month before yours from Differential Ventures. I remember a part of the conversation I had with Nick was, he was saying that, in part, like the Shark Tank mentality with some entrepreneurs is a problem in that, it gives a misimpression. Like, in other words, they're very, they look at technical investing. They have very strict, sort of tight criteria. And, they get, like most VCs, they get 3,500, proposals and, this, on the one hand, I do believe in theory, anybody can raise capital because I believe in the human potential. I think anybody, in theory has that potential. But the truth is that, first of all, very few companies should even raise money. Most people just don't walk into a room of investors like Shark Tank and have the opportunity to pitch them, right? So talk a little bit about that experience in general, any cool stories you have, and maybe how it compares to the real world of raising venture capital.
Oh my God, that's the first place to start. So when you become an entrepreneur, everyone runs up to you and says, "Oh, I have this great idea for you. You should be on Shark Tank." Right. And I'm an engineer and I'm an entrepreneur and I'm also an introvert. Like I do very well in presentations and things, but at the end of the day, I would call myself an introvert. Yeah. And so there's several things that I could talk about on Shark Tank, but the first one is it's a reality TV show, and I think because of my background, we went in thinking much more like it was not traditional, but a standard pitch, and it would sort of the merit of the product and the merit of our pitch would be a large contributor. Just back to my days as an engineer, saying, well, we'll do a bake-off, and whichever product does better, that's the one we'll buy. Well, that's not what reality TV shows are about. So just not really acknowledging we are on stage, we're on TV, it's a TV show, as opposed to a way to raise money, was one mindset shift that I would encourage everyone who wants to go on a Shark Tank to really consider. And also, we are a relatively complex product, and you can't, it's not like a cup or something that you can, I've developed this new idea and you can just swipe your credit card and buy it, and the exposure on national television will warrant millions of individual consumers. So a B2C product. Right. So that in and of itself, I think, was one of the hardest, most challenging things about being selected in the show, is that we weren't B2C, and so we didn't see interest come from customers that could just drive our revenue. And the third thing that I will say is the people that have reached out, the individuals that have reached out to us, there were hundreds of people, and I responded to each and every one of them. I'm not sure that individuals who purchase products through Shark Tank are necessarily your ideal customer either. So it was, it's something I'll certainly tell my grandkids about in terms of moving the business forward. It was not time well spent because of that B2C component. But we got some fantastic advice from Barbara Corcoran, and she said, this, I can see the potential in how this will really change. I'm not even sure this got edited because it gets heavily edited. So I'm not sure if what she said that I remember, if that ended up in the final episode, but she said, your belief in your product and your belief in how you change the world is what really makes companies successful. And so I took away what I needed to take away from that experience. We didn't get a deal, spoiler alert, And every time that it's rerun, the phone rings off the hook, and people want to know about a product that we actually have moved away from because now we support only enterprises. So it was definitely a tale. But I would tell people, if you don't have a customer-facing product, then it's probably not. It's definitely not the right avenue for exposure.
It's interesting. I was at an event where Kevin O'Leary was speaking, and one of the things that he said, I think he said this on the show as well, and it really makes sense to me, and why it really, for B2C, it is potentially different.
It's perfect.
And that is, in B2C, what he said is that the biggest thing that Shark Tank does is significantly reduce the customer acquisition cost.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's effectively what it does, because you get this huge exposure, right? And customer acquisition cost is huge in a B2C market.
Yes.
And if you could accelerate that and reduce the cost of it, because you get all this, crazy exposure on the show, then it makes, your company more profitable, growth more quick, and you're more investable. But that doesn't really work the same way on a B2B business. So.
Right. Yes, we had the World Health Organization reached out to us and said, we're interested in the potential of what you have, and that's a whole other story. But that there is an opportunity to get exposure to types of organizations that you'd be interested in working with, but it's certainly skewed towards end consumers.
Yeah, totally get it. Okay, so before we start to get into the last couple of questions and wrap up. Anything else? This is a very broad question, and you've had so many amazing experiences. But anything else in terms of the sort of journey, whether it's raising capital or any other kind of deal? Listen, being in a business partnership is a deal, right? Even how you do with that. So whether it's in that area or raising capital, any other kind of strategic alliances or deals you've done, anything else you want to sort of mention that's of interest, or lessons you've learned, or things that were useful to the audience?
This is an odd one, but you asked for whatever comes to mind. Please. I think that the opportunity to continue to sit with the vision on some frequency is really, really important. So you've mentioned a number of times the internal work. Yes. I think that as you start to, a CEO is a really challenging job. No one tells you that when you start off. It means, yes, you're talking to the investors, but you're also taking out the trash. It's a really broad role in the early days. And I think that it can become so frenetic and so all-consuming that you can leave some of the reasons why you started the company, or you can sort of drift from some of the reasons you started the company. So one of my never break routines of the day is to spend 7 minutes. And it's not a long time, but when you've got so much going on, you've got so many emails to answer and so many things to do, 7 minutes and think about what's the future hold, not for our product, but also the vision for how we see content evolving. And some of the best, most important approaches that we've taken have come from that thought process, and then talking about that thought process with my team. So I guess there, in all the craziness and all of the activity that goes on with being an entrepreneur in this ecosystem, having a little bit of stillness, even for 7 minutes a day, has made a huge difference. And I didn't learn that, or didn't start to practice that until we've been at this for a few years.
Wow. So I feel like, of course, at the end of our time here, you've opened up a topic that I feel like we could spend another hour on. Practices, as entrepreneurs or as business people, to stay connected to vision and just, to stay centered. And it's something that I super believe in. I mean, I have all these, I have these end of year completion processes, these, 531 visioning process that my wife and I do every year, and the ways we stay connected to it, and displays, and and all kinds of stuff. And I think this is such a, folks, I actually want to just take a couple more minutes on this, even though we're running a little longer, because this is such a crucial conversation for, entrepreneurs, whether you're raising capital or not, building a business in any way, because it's so easy to get caught up in being in reactive mode, right? And, and you mentioned, Sherisse, So I love the comment you made earlier about, it's sort of better that I didn't see the whole journey or know
Yes,
it. I wouldn't have
absolutely.
done it. I think every entrepreneur really feels that way. It's like, you just knock them down as they come because, if you saw the whole journey, you'd be like, yeah, no, maybe I'll just keep that paycheck, but I think one of the biggest things that has us as entrepreneurs be able to deal with the ups and downs and the challenges and the obstacles, is having ways that we connect to that bigger vision, that purpose, that calling, as my wife would say. We'll plug for her book, The Calling. That we are able to get reconnected to that bigger vision. I keep mentioning my interview with Nick Adams, but it just seems to be relevant here. He talked about how when they look for founders, they look for people who, they want to at least take one technical founder, blah, blah, blah. But he really talked about how somebody had something bigger that was driving them. Like that's their secret vetting, a real big vetting thing, is that they want somebody who has something that's bigger that's driving them, whether it's a vision, their purpose to make a difference, to just their wanting to prove something about themselves, their lives, their family, whatever it is. So I think this is such an important topic. I'm glad you raised it.
I agree, and this is going to sound crazy, but I truly have had this experience. I think being an entrepreneur is like seeing a shadow or a ghost or something kind of in your peripheral vision, and you start to turn to it, and you can see more details about it, and you can understand what the future holds, and you're sort of drawn to the art of what's possible there. And the challenge is, as you spend more time understanding the potential and the impact and the positive contributions that whatever this idea can make, it becomes more and more real, and you start to pursue it and get closer to it. And everybody else in the room still sees it. If they see even the faint shadow or the outline of the ghost, it's so not tangible to them. And so you're kind of bridging this world of what could be, what you can see so clearly, and you're explaining it to someone that can't see it at all. Yes. And there's times that you think, oh my gosh, it's me. It's not really there. And then you have these little wins and these experiences. And when people use the product and they go nuts, and you think, this is why I'm doing it. But you do kind of live in the world of the future and what is tangible and what has happened and what's right now, where you're explaining things to people, and they're like, I don't see what you see yet. It's exhilarating, but it can also be really frustrating. But it definitely, I feel like those people that have this experience, when I describe it, they nod and they say, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. There's that future that you can see really, really clearly.
Yeah, and it raises two things, and then I'll just make these comments, and we'll have to move. But like I said, we spent an hour on this. Raises two things for me that I fundamentally believe, and people have heard me say, on this podcast and all the content that I do. One is I truly believe in that conversation of that, you wouldn't have the vision if God, the universe, whatever your construct is, like it wouldn't come to you if you weren't meant to fulfill it, right? There's a reason why that vision, that dream, that, calling comes to you. And, that's, what we're here to do, and just, to trust and honor that. And then the second, the second thing about it is that the fundamental belief that, and I say this all the time, that everything that exists in the world has been created twice, right? Once it's created in somebody's vision in their mind, right? Before it's manifest, whether it's the chair that I'm sitting on, or whether it's the company that I built or the company that you built, right? Everything is created twice, once in somebody's vision in mind, and then it manifests in the world. And it can't manifest in the world until it's created the first time, in somebody's vision. And when you combine that with the fact that it's your vision and not anybody else's, that there's always a period of time where you can see it clearly when others can't. And part of, I think, the game is to enroll, whether it's investors, employees, customers,
Yes.
in that vision.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great stuff. Okay, so Sherisse, before I ask you my last question, what's the best place for people to find out more about you and Pagedip?
Pagedip.com is where you can find more information about us. And Sherisse@pagedip.com is my direct email. And I am a crazed person when it comes to responding to everyone that reaches out to me. to support others, as well as those that are interested in our company and our product.
Love it. Love it. So my final question on the podcast is always the same, which is freedom is my highest ideal in life. I have my intent.org little bracelet thing that I wear that has the word freedom on it. And for me, that ranges from everything from like big issues like freedom from all people from oppression and, to the reason I'm an entrepreneur, right? And I run my own show and I don't work with somebody. So what does freedom mean to you, and how does it impact your life and business?
Freedom to me is the opportunity to make the choices that will be most fulfilling in your life. And I'm keenly aware of the differences in that capacity and that level of freedom for people around the globe in the U.S. And for very different reasons. But I do think in some ways freedom can be a luxury that some people have more of and others have less of. I think that for me personally, having the freedom has been expanded through my education and through my striving to kind of have this more entrepreneurial and engineering-led journey. And so when you said that word, for me, education came to mind, and thinking about the doors that have opened and the things that have happened because I've chosen to educate, and I've chosen to free my mind to pursue other interests. So I love the question.
Sherisse Hawkins, thank you so much for being on the DealQuest podcast and for bringing all of the value that you have to our audience.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. I want to invite you to a unique way to tap into the wisdom and experience of the DealQuest community. Join the DealQuest Deal Den Zoom calls, a free monthly 90-minute mastermind. In the mastermind, we address all the challenges you may be facing and help support you with the opportunities that may arise in terms of deal-driven growth. You will get input not only from me, but all the members on the call will collaborate and serve each other in a mastermind format. To sign up for the free mastermind, go to www.corykupfer.com/dealden. That's corykupfer.com/dealden. I'll see you there. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.